Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer with you. All right, guys. So I want to follow on with some natal aspects. And today what I want to talk about is Sun and Neptune. And I'm going to specifically talk about the Sun being in a square aspect to Neptune in the natal chart. This particular aspect is a very, very tricky aspect to handle for a number of different reasons. But before I unpack that, I guess the first thing that we need to understand is, what does the Sun represent in the birth chart? So the Sun is obviously our identity, our personality, our ego, and our conscious self. So it is how we are trying to express ourselves out there in the world, how we are trying to actualize ourselves in our path. It's an ego planet. Sorry, I just had something pop up on my screen. It's an ego planet that enables us to have a sense of identity, enables us to express ourselves, our external persona and personality. It's our vitality and energy and solar force energy. So when you bring that into relationship with Neptune in the square aspect, then what begins to take place is that the Sun gets affected by Neptune. It's not the Sun affecting Neptune, it's Neptune affecting the Sun. So what is Neptune? Neptune is a transpersonal planet. It's a planet of transcendence. It's a planet of divine truth. It's the planet of the divine. It's the planet that connects to the collective unconscious. It's got nothing to do with boundaries. It's got nothing to do with ego. It's got nothing to do with personality. It is everything that is not of this world. So we're talking about an energy that is predominantly extremely unconscious within us, that we are all connected to, whether we have a Sun-Neptune aspect or not, because we all have Neptune in our chart. But a person who has a Sun square Neptune aspect is going to feel that Neptune in their inner life, their inner world. And where it actually begins is actually, first of all, the thing that I would like you guys to consider, if you already haven't, is that any planetary energy in the birth chart and any aspect in the birth chart between two planets or more can be projected onto anybody or anything. And it frequently is the case that we are projecting these planetary energies, these archetypal forces and energies onto everything around us in our life, onto the world at large, onto our personal relationships, family relationships, partners, bosses at work, work environments, the police force, for instance. Saturn rules the police force, so we project that Saturn onto the police. They become an authority. So pretty much every single energy in our chart can be potentially projected onto another. That's what I'm trying to say, and that's really, really important to understand. Even in the world of psychology, it is understood that the way we operate on a conscious level, we're really only conscious of perhaps about 15% of what's really going on within us. So the rest of us is unconscious. So the unconscious world and the subconscious world has tremendous power over our life, because the unconscious forces essentially dominate and dictate most of our behaviors and the way we understand ourselves and life. So when you're talking about a Sun square Neptune, you're talking about an individual who really struggles to have a strong sense of identity. The Sun Neptune, I just want to go back to what I was going to say a moment ago. The Sun Neptune aspect for an individual begins in their early life experience with the relationship they have with their father. Because the Sun represents our own identity and our own self-actualization, in the birth chart, it also represents our father, you know, whether it was a biological father or whether it was a father figure that raised us. Whoever was the masculine patriarchal figure in your life is represented by the Sun. There are other planets that we could bring into it, but we're just specifically talking about the Sun today. So this Sun square Neptune, for the individual when they are this small child, naturally will be projected onto the father. So the father, as a result of that projection, can be many different things. But the most typical things that seem to show up is that the father was absent in some kind of way for this child, whether it was emotionally, psychologically, physically, or spiritually. There was some significant sense of absence of the father. And through that absence, this child did not learn how to develop a strong sense of identity. So there's a real blurred sense of who they actually are in this world. The Sun is the driving force in terms of how we actualize ourselves out there in the world. It's our identity that speaks for us, that speaks through us, that speaks to the world at large and stands in a place of this is who I am. But with Neptune flooding through, it compromises that Sun's expression in a very, very big way. And it leaves the individual feeling confused, uncertain, inferior to others. And the other element about them also is that they are incredibly impressionable. So when someone is impressionable, which is pretty much all small little beings, all small children are incredibly impressionable from birth to 7 years old particularly. That's even an understanding that we have in the psychological world. As I've said before, the Buddhists say, show me a 7-year-old boy and I'll show you the man. Because when we are born right up to 7 years of age, we are essentially impressionable to everything around us. So whatever is being mirrored to us or not mirrored to us, the role playing that we're seeing of our primary caregivers, how they are relating to each other, whether there's any emotional language, whether there's affection, whether there's encouragement, all these things which are qualities that eventually evolve within us, initially stem from what we encountered with our parents. So the Sun square Neptune person had a sense that their father wasn't there in some kind of way. And I've seen this in many famous people's charts as well as many readings that I've done for people. The other very important thing or very important word that I'd like you guys to remember when you're looking at the planet Neptune. As I said, Neptune is all about divine oneness and spirituality and transcendence. It's the ultimate truth, which is very, very, very challenging for our left brain ego structures to even comprehend or fathom, which is why this energy is so tricky and elusive and out of reach. But the one word that you don't often see in books or in presentations and so forth is the word disappointment. Now, the word disappointment carries a lot of meaning when we're exploring the energy of Neptune in relation to our birth chart and what aspects it has to certain planets. So in this case, making a square to the sun, what happens is that the child who eventually grows into an adult has this experience within themselves of feeling a great sense of disappointment about the father, because the father was absent, or the father was high on drugs or alcohol or whatever most of his life. That's Neptune. Neptune is connected to all substances that take you into an altered state of consciousness. So this incredible sense of disappointment that stems from the relationship or lack of the relationship that perhaps one had with their father resides within the individual. So it is very typical for a Sun Square Neptune person to say to you or to me, yes, I feel incredibly disappointed with the upbringing I had with my dad, or his lack of ability to understand me, or to be there for me emotionally or even physically. And it's one thing to understand also is that I'm not suggesting that the father intentionally and purposely and consciously abandoned this child or neglected this child or wasn't there for him in some kind of way. It's not a conscious thing. It will show up through each individual in terms of the context of the circumstances. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So the famous Carl Jung, for instance, who I'm sure most of you would know who he is, but for those of you who don't, he was an astrologer, he was a psychiatrist, psychologist, psychotherapist. He's the father of psychology, essentially, but he took it to a very, very high level, and he has a Sun Square Neptune in his chart. Now, Carl Jung is one of the greatest individuals that existed. The wisdom and the power in his wisdom and the deep understanding of all the archetypes, which is the 12 zodiac signs, that he basically brought through into his work, into his consultation room, is one of the most powerful works that has ever been done in the world of psychological astrology and psychology, period. Now, his Sun Square Neptune reflects, if you look into his history in terms of his own relationship with his father, he was incredibly disappointed with his father. And another word that we can add to that list is disillusionment. There can be an over-idealizing of the father. So a few things there. It can be the absent father, you know, physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, or it can be the father that is completely idealized in the child's eyes. Now, going back to Carl Jung, he was incredibly disappointed with his father because his father was a minister in a Orthodox religion. And Jung, if you look into the work that he's done and to what he represented and who he was, he certainly wasn't limited by one particular religion. You know, he was incredibly expansive, and his mind was out of this world, actually, in terms of what he understood and what he brought to the world of psychology and the archetypes. So in other words, he used the Sun Square Neptune. Initially, it represented the disappointment in his father. Now, the part where his father was a minister in an Orthodox religion, that's the Sun Neptune aspect, because Neptune connects to spirituality and religion as well. So that Sun Square Neptune describes who his father was. And Carl Jung was disappointed because his father was well, Carl Jung felt that his father was limited through this organized belief system that he had. And as I said, Carl Jung transcended through his wisdom and his knowledge and his understanding and his training and his teaching and all the counseling and psychotherapy sessions that he did and so forth. He essentially transcended everything, which is, you could say that's the highest manifestation of a Sun Square Neptune. But we're talking about Carl Jung. There's no other Carl Jung. There was just one Carl Jung. So he was who he was. So there's the Sun Square Neptune figured in his life. You need to understand the word disappointment is very, very powerful when you are examining Neptune. One reason for that is because, you see, Neptune is so idealistic from our position here in the physical form, because Neptune is not of this physical form. It's everything but this physical 3D dimension. It's spiritual world. It's the other side. You know, it's the energy that transcends all things. So it's very difficult for our left brain to really comprehend how vast that is. So through our left brain or through our conscious self, to try and integrate that energy into this 3D reality, what usually happens is that the filter that we look through that gets projected through Neptune has it's totally idealistic, because it's connected to the other side, to the spiritual world, to source, truth, to oneness, to the divine. Now, if you try to materialize that sort of concept or that idea or that understanding or that knowing, if you try to materialize it and bring it into a conceptual frame, it gets lost and it gets projected into fantasy and illusion and ideals. And as a result of that, what happens to the individual is that they are left feeling very disappointed, because wherever they are projecting that Neptune, in this case onto the father cannot live up to those ideals of what Neptune represents. So naturally, the child is going to be left feeling very, very disappointed. It's really important to understand that, because when you see a Sun Square Neptune in a chart, you'll almost always get a story out of a person that relates back to their father. The father being absent, father was a hippie, father was a drug addict. Now, on a more positive field, the father could have been an actor, a movie star. Not sure that's positive or negative. It's just another manifestation, actually, of Neptune. The father could have been a preacher in a church, a minister, a guru. So all things to do with that Neptune energy being sort of somehow grounded into this material plane. But let's just say that, you know, the father was a drug addict, so that it certainly would be a problem. The father was just disassociated or disconnected in some kind of way through his own sort of fragmented psyche, you know, so unable to be there for this kid and give this kid a strong sense of identity and enable them to begin to actualize themselves in who they actually are, because the father himself is not certain of even who he is. That can come through. true too. Some other characteristics of Sun Square Neptune, because Neptune weakens the Sun, and the Sun is, you know, the conscious sort of self, if you like, striving to be conscious at least. Neptune weakens that experience for an individual. So, as I said, there can be inferiority and a lot of self-doubt. Person can feel quite discouraged, you know, when they go to actualize themselves and exert their goals or direct their path with who they are in the world. There's a great sense of confusion of who they are in that, and there's a lot of self-doubt that comes up with that because there's extreme uncertainty with who they actually are. But what a person with a Sun Square Neptune ultimately does need to learn is to have a greater sense of acceptance of themselves and that they are just as good as anybody else, because that self-doubt creeps in very, very strongly. It can also occasionally describe a person who is dishonest with their actions as well, whether that's unconsciously or deliberately. That can be there as a theme. It can also be a person who really struggles to confront their battles, to sort of fight for themselves. So as a result of that, they'll abandon certain sort of fights that they might have to engage in, and obviously feel quite defeated as a result of that. But that's a very tricky sort of territory again, because the very fact is that sometimes they do really need to stand up for themselves and fight for themselves in a particular cause or situation. But because of this sort of deep inferior complexity within them, they'll take the back stance. They won't push themselves into a situation that's confronting, and unnecessarily lose very important battles, so to speak. As I said, they are very, very impressionable, and it's not just when they're children, throughout their whole life. These beings, these souls, these people who are born with a Sun Square Neptune are very impressionable people. And another way of understanding that is to say that because they are so impressionable, meaning they are identifying, if you like, with anyone that's around them at any given moment. They just blend into another, if you like, and that adds further difficulty to knowing within their own self who they are and what they're actually feeling and experiencing, what belongs to them and what actually belongs to somebody else. The Neptune, you know, it blurs the lines and it has no boundaries. That's another very important point. Sun Square Neptune people do need to be very, very mindful and conscious of creating healthy boundaries, because if they don't, what they'll experience is victim martyr type of experiences, relationships, drawing in and attracting, you know, people who want to be saved and rescued, or they themselves might feel that they need to be saved and rescued. The other thing that's really important, because of their hypersensitivity, Sun Square Neptune, health is something that's really, really fundamental. So I'm not saying that they will have bad health or difficult health, but the sun is our life force, okay? So it's our vitality. And Neptune influences that vitality and life force a great deal. So an example would be a person with Sun Square Neptune would be like super sensitive to drugs and alcohol and medication, even food and certain drinks. So they've just got such a sensitivity to all these substances. And so a Sun Square Neptune person needs to be very aware of this, because they can engage or ingest certain things that would really be very harmful to them, where for a person who didn't have a Sun Square Neptune wouldn't be nearly as affected as a Sun Square Neptune person would be. Now, Neptune rules the immune system, okay? So Neptune ruling the immune system and forming a square to the sun, that's an issue. That really points to a person whose immune system is hypersensitive. Okay, so they react to things quite strongly. That's something important to remember. The other thing about the sun, wanting to be expressed and actualized, because it's so difficult with the Sun Square Neptune, there's the Sun Square Neptune person can feel quite discouraged from going out there in the world and achieving the things they want to achieve, right? That relates to the self-doubt and the feeling inferior to others. So that's part of that as well. Another example I'd like to share with you guys is this example is a true story of somebody. He was an astrologer actually, and he did some workshops, I don't know, a really long time ago here in Australia. And my teacher who taught me astrology did a workshop with him probably 30 years ago or something like that. Anyway, this guy had a Sun Square Neptune in his chart, this astrologer, and the sun was in the 12th house. It's really important to pay attention to the houses, because that's going to give you a lot more meaning and context in understanding where this Sun Square Neptune is really going to play out and manifest. Anyway, in this case, the sun was in the 12th and Neptune was in the 9th house. And this person, when he was 2 years old, this is a very, very powerful image I'm about to give you. This is a true story. So hopefully you can connect to imagery, because if you can, you'll understand how powerful this example is. The sun in the 12th, Neptune in the 9th, this 2-year-old boy, when he was 2 years old, his father, which is represented by that Sun Square Neptune, had to go to war, because his father was born back in the 20s, or something like that. So he had to go to war. So this 2-year-old boy, one particular day, his mother took him to the beach. This is the sun in the 12th house. And a 2-year-old boy got onto some sand dunes, really high up onto some sand dunes. And he stood there. A 2-year-old boy stood there, and he was looking over out into the ocean, trying to look as far as he can possibly see. And his mother asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm looking for Dad, trying to find Dad." That's a beautiful and very sad, actually, story as well, but a very powerful imagery of that Sun Square Neptune. So this 2-year-old boy had such an incredibly strong sense of his father's absence. And his sun in the 12th house is representing that beach, that ocean that he's standing on. And the sun was in Sagittarius. Sagittarius rules long distance, expansive views. And there he is on the sand dunes looking for his father, trying to find his father. That's a beautiful example. Okay. Just remember, as I said at the start of the video, any planetary energy in the chart can be projected, and quite often is, onto others around us. And look, the reason that happens is because we are unconscious of most of the energies in our chart. So until we consciously integrate these archetypal energies, all the gods and goddesses, the entire zodiac, until we integrate that consciously within us, we will always project those energies out there. because we need to experience these energies, and they are not whole and integrated automatically when we're born. They're in there, but in order for our conscious self to grasp and understand every single one of them, we have to evolve and grow and develop and become conscious. So in esoteric astrology, the very strong, important message that comes through that field of work is the understanding that the way we can become whole and integrated and healed, if you like, is by connecting or bringing together our soul life with the ego. And many people don't do that. Many people don't know how to do that. Many people struggle to do that, whatever the case. But that is the ultimate goal, if you like, for all of us. If we can integrate our soul life to be in alignment with our conscious ego self, then we've integrated, you know, those energies internally on a very healthy level, and there's far less projection going on. I'm not saying that projection is a wrong or bad thing. Nothing is wrong or bad. Nothing is good or bad necessarily. Everything is something, belongs to something, is a part of something, is a manifestation of something, is a part of an evolution of something. So there is very good reason for everything that does surface and manifest. And in order for us to become conscious and evolve, we have to experience things outside of ourselves first, so that we can start to become conscious at least, or have an awareness of something. Very difficult to become conscious of something and completely aware of something that's lying in the unconscious. That's very difficult to do. Okay, just want to see that I've covered everything here. Yeah. Yep, that's pretty much it. So hopefully this video helps you guys understand the Sun Square Neptune a little bit further if you didn't have much understanding of it, or if you did, maybe this added a few more pointers to your understanding. Yeah, okay, great. So just remember, Neptune will often present disappointments. Now, I'll do some more videos with Neptune aspecting other planets as well, and other planets aspecting other planets and so forth. So there's loads more to come. Stay tuned, and thank you so much for engaging through your comments and questions, and for those of you who have emailed me. I really appreciate and welcome all your questions and comments. I like to say that at the end of every video, because I like to encourage you all to engage and connect with the content, and because I think it's such a powerful platform for such a wide sort of stream, because there are people watching these videos that haven't studied astrology. There are people watching who have. There's a number of different people, and I think all of us can always learn, regardless of what level we are at in our understanding of astrology or in our own evolutionary path. Because if there was nothing left for you to understand, or myself, I would not be here and you wouldn't be watching this video. So yeah, it's important for us to share and to connect and to engage. So feel free to leave any questions or comments below, and stay tuned for another video coming up shortly. Many blessings and lots of love. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you already haven't. Thank you. Thanks for your support, guys.